There are moments in life that force us to face a harsh truth, not when we are at our weakest, but when we are at our most normal. When we board a plane carrying the hope of a new day. And then, in a matter of seconds, someone else decides who we are, based on the color of our skin and the way we look. Imagine this. You board the plane your company owns. You sit in the seat you paid for. And then a flight attendant leans over, slaps your boarding pass on your shoulder, and says in a contemptuous tone, "This seat is not for someone like you." If it were you, what would you do? Stand up angrily or silently endure like so many times before in your life? Or would you choose a different path? In today's story, a black female CEO will force the system to look at itself, not with a scream, but with calm, intelligence, and truth. If you appreciate stories that touch people's hearts, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so we can start this flight together. That morning at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport was a pale gray. A thin layer of mist covered the wide windows, dimming the early morning sunlight like a quiet consolation. Amidst the constant announcements from the loudspeakers in Terminal C, people were dragging plastic suitcases, clutching hot cups of coffee, each busy in their own world. Amidst the bustle, Ava Sinclair stepped into the priority queue with a battered dark brown leather bag, the kind that at first glance looked like it came from a small shop, not something custom-made by a century-old brand. Ava had always preferred simplicity. Simplicity gave her something few people could buy with money. No one would notice her. Or at least, she thought so. Ava wore a slim black blazer and her mother's old watch. She wore no makeup, just a dab of lip balm. She looked like an ordinary African-American woman who could have been a teacher, an office worker, or a busy mother. No one knew that her quiet demeanor hid one of the sharpest strategic minds in the aviation industry. As Ava stepped onto the Skylink Airlines ramp, she felt the phone in her pocket vibrate. It was a message from her assistant. "Board meeting has been reconfirmed. Have a safe flight." Ava smiled slightly and tucked her phone into her pocket. She just hoped the short flight would be uneventful so she could get some sleep before her important meeting. But life sometimes has its own way of testing people. When Ava stepped into the first-class cabin, the first sound she heard was not the flight attendant's greeting, but a voice that sounded annoyed. "Excuse me, ma'am. First class isn't for charity." Female voice, cold, with a hint of sarcasm, clearly not directed at a passenger. Ava looked up. The woman was Melissa Vaughn, the flight attendant. Heavy makeup, red lips, a half-smile, as if she were used to judging others. Melissa stood right in front of seat 1, hands on hips, eyes scanning Ava from head to toe, as if she were looking for a fake. Ava smiled politely. "I'm in seat 1A, yes." Melissa narrowed her eyes. "Oh, honey, this place is not for the overconfident." Then, without waiting for Ava to react, Melissa snatched the boarding pass from her hand, glanced at it, then lightly slapped the ticket on Ava's shoulder, hard enough for the person sitting behind to hear the slap. A heavy silence fell over the cabin. Ava sat motionless. Her body instinctively wanted to stand, but her heart held back. For a brief moment, memories of her childhood, mistreatment, flooded back. The supermarket security guard following her because she looked like a shoplifter, the teacher questioning her test scores for being too good for a colored girl. Ava grew up with those soft wounds. Wounds that didn't bleed, but never went away. She looked at Melissa, not angry, just a deep weariness. Melissa half smiled, turning to the other passenger. "We've got another one trying to sneak into first class." A middle-aged white man in seat 1C snorted. "Figures." An elderly woman whispered to her husband, "This happens every day. It's tiring." Ava remained silent. She gently retrieved her boarding pass from her lap and placed it neatly in her palm. Melissa crossed her arms. "Ma'am, let me be clear. First class is not for the weak. You don't need to try." Ava took a deep breath. She felt a familiar feeling. The feeling of being caught between two choices: to endure like all the other times, or to let the truth be told and unleash a storm. She didn't choose. She just tilted her head and asked lightly, "Do you want to check anything else?" Melissa laughed, turned her phone toward herself, and opened Skylink's internal live stream. "Guys, here comes the drama again." Ava looked at the red phone in Melissa's hand. A strange calm came over her. The kind of calm that comes only after experiencing so much injustice. She knew the storm was coming, but this time, Ava would not bow her head. The narrative is light, but the situation opens a door of pressure. Every eye watching Ava now carries a different prejudice. And the viewers, those sitting in front of the screen, can recognize themselves in that moment. What if that calmness comes not from weakness, but from a silent power that no one has yet guessed? Let's move on. The air in the first-class cabin seemed to freeze at Melissa's sarcastic remark. A low murmur rose up, not loud, but enough for Ava to hear bits of prejudice floating in the air. A young man in row 2 leaned his head toward his friend and said softly but sharply, piercing the fragile silence, "She clearly doesn't belong here." Ava heard it all. She didn't look back. She didn't explain. She didn't defend herself. She just rested her hands on her thighs, her thumbs unconsciously brushing the edge of her boarding pass, as if to reassure herself that she was still in the right place in the right place. But it still hurts. An old pain, a familiar pain. Melissa approached again this time, standing close enough that her breath was on Ava's hair. "Ma'am, can't you hear me? Move. Someone else needs to use this space." Ava looked up. Her voice was light as air, but it hit Melissa's ear like an unpleasant bump. "I have a valid ticket for seat 1A. If you need further verification, I'm at your disposal." Melissa narrowed her eyes. "Don't make things difficult for me. I know exactly what kind of people forge documents." A humph came from row 1C. The middle-aged man was secretly filming a video with his phone. Ava saw the light from the camera reflected in his eyes, a light of anticipation, as if he was waiting for an entertaining scandal. In that moment, Ava felt a wave of helplessness roll inside her. Why does she still have to go through this? After so many years, so many achievements, so much effort to not cause trouble, she thought of her grandmother, the woman who had taught her that black people who wanted respect had to be doubly careful. But today, it felt like a burden that was slowly becoming unbearable. Melissa opened her phone and held it up. The live stream continued. The camera turned to Ava. "Guys, we have a passenger today. Like this. Seat 1A. Her voice was full of enjoyment, as if putting others down was part of the fun of the job. "Who gave you permission to film me?" Ava asked, her voice calm, though her chest was pounding. "I filmed it for internal purposes. You don't need to know." Melissa waved her hand, continuing to smile at the camera. An elderly woman in the back row whispered, "She doesn't look like she can afford that seat." A young man added, "Probably using someone's loyalty points." Small fragmentary words, but they cut like knives. Ava wasn't afraid of direct insults. She was afraid of the way people forced her into a frame, just because she had a skin color they weren't used to seeing in seat 1A. Ava felt a heavy tension pull down her shoulders. She wanted to stand. She wanted to clarify her identity. She wanted to end this scene immediately. But part of her whispered, "Don't. They'll say I'm arrogant. I'm hot-tempered. I'm a troublemaker." Another part whispered more strongly, "If I stay silent, they will think I accept." The two voices clashed like two opposing currents. For a brief moment, Ava felt 38, but also 18, the young girl standing in front of the store. The security guard asking her to turn over her handbag because it looked suspicious. She had swallowed those things all her life. Today, she didn't know if she wanted to swallow them anymore. Melissa still live-streaming, her voice louder. "Security. We need security to verify this passenger." The whole cabin started to vibrate slightly. A few people raised their phones to film. Others shook their heads as if they had seen this too many times. Ava closed her eyes. Her heart skipped a beat. Is it worth it to try to stay calm? Or should I just say it all out loud, she asked herself. But when Ava opened her eyes, she only saw the compartment door open and two security guards enter. Officer Grant, the taller man, stepped forward. "Where's the issue?" Melissa Gio Te Chi, Tong Vao, Ava. "This passenger is refusing to move. She's in a seat that clearly isn't hers." Grant glanced at Ava, quick, determined. His gaze held no malice, but was tinged with unconscious bias, as if he had seen this situation 100 times. "Ma'am," Grant said, "please stand up and let us handle it." "Who told you I was wrong?" Ava asked back, her voice low and even. Grant didn't answer. He just looked at the ticket in Melissa's hand. Melissa added, her voice uncomfortably confident. "She's holding some kind of premium ticket. Obviously fake." Apparently, she decided that Ava didn't belong here. Ava sat still. So still, it seemed like surrender. But in that silence, a wave was brewing. Officer Millen, the younger one, looked around in confusion. Ma'am, we have to keep the flight on time. If you cooperate, we can help. Ava cut him off very gently. I have been cooperative. I just have not accepted being treated wrongly. The whole cabin was silent for a few seconds. It wasn't a loud statement, nor a declaration of war, but it was enough to change the atmosphere. Something shifted, small but obvious. A young Latina woman in the back row, Elena Morales, wrinkled her brows in displeasure. She had been watching the situation from afar. Elena sat up slightly. Excuse me, I saw her get on this seat with a valid boarding pass. I thought. Melissa turned around and growled, Ma'am, please stay out of this. Elena stepped back, not out of fear, but because she was used to the way people silence the voices of those not in positions of power. Ava glanced at Elena. In that moment, two women, different races, different backgrounds, shared an unspoken understanding. Ava nodded slightly to Elena as a silent thank you. Supervisor Reed Dalton walked in dressed in a neat black suit, the confident expression of someone familiar with quick decision-making. He looked at Melissa, then at the two security guards, then at Ava. What's the problem here, Melissa? Noignet. She's refusing to move, and her ID looks questionable. Dalton didn't bother asking Ava. He turned to Grant. Remove her from the aircraft. Ava raised her head. A flash of worry crossed her eyes, not for herself, but for this feeling of being unfairly piled on again. Elena thought, Lynn, that's not right. She didn't do anything. Dalton ignored him. The passengers around him shook their heads, not caring who was right or wrong as long as they were going to miss their flight. Ava felt that familiar pang in her chest, the feeling of being forced out of where she belonged. But this time it was accompanied by another voice inside her. No. That's enough. She adjusted her blazer, lifted her chin, and looked directly at Dalton. And for the first time since the confrontation, Ava spoke in a more authoritative, confident voice. I will stand up if you have proof that I am wrong. The whole cabin fell silent again. Dalton looked at her, his eyes filled with confusion and defiance. He hadn't expected her to protest. Most people, like Ava, in his opinion, would have gone down quietly to avoid trouble. But Ava is not most. She added another sentence, light but like an arrow aimed at the system's weak point. You didn't look at the ticket. You didn't check the ID. But you decided I didn't belong here. What does that say, Mr. Dalton? The passengers began to whisper. Some turned to look at Ava with a different look, no longer contempt but curiosity and awe. Elena whispered to the person next to her, she's not afraid. Wow. Dalton lost his cool. Security, take her down. Now. Ava took a slow, soft breath. She felt a slight tremor in her fingertips, but she didn't let anyone see it. She knew this moment was the turning point. Either she will continue to be a victim, or she will begin to open the door to truth. She said nothing more, just put her hands in her pockets and got ready. By the end of this section, one thing is clear: the storm is coming, but it doesn't belong to those who are shouting. It belongs to those who are silent. The door closed behind the two security guards, leaving a cold click in the air that was already as tense as a swirling pond. Ava watched them approach, their steps, even their uniforms neat, their faces devoid of malice, but it still made her heart sink. Not because they're bad, but because they're part of the system, a system Ava has dealt with all her life. Officer Grant stood before her, a white American man in his 50s, tall and broad-shouldered like a cop in a movie. His eyes were kind, but had the tiredness of someone used to seeing problems where he was taught to find them. Ma'am, Grant said, his voice steady as if reading a procedure, we need you to cooperate and get out of your chair for verification. Ava looked up and replied softly, I haven't been asked any questions. What have you verified? Grant paused for a beat. Just a beat, but enough for observant observers to notice his slight confusion. Officer Millen, the younger man, glanced at Grant as if waiting for orders. He was in his 30s with bright brown eyes and seemed to be wondering if things were serious enough to warrant a deplanement. But Melissa stood next to them, her voice high-pitched as if trying to take over. She's interfering with the flight. Please get her out. We don't have time for this. Ava saw Millen's eyes waver. He looked at Ava, then at Melissa, then at the ticket trembling slightly in Ava's hand. He realized the ticket wasn't fake. He knew it, but he didn't say anything. A small silence began to fall. A paradoxical silence where everyone knew something was wrong, but no one forced themselves to speak up. Ava lowered her eyes to the ticket. her hands clenched in her lap, not because she was afraid, but because the memories were flooding back so strong that she wanted to run away. Ava was only 19 years old then. She was detained at the grocery store because the manager thought she looked like someone who had shoplifted. Her grandmother came down to pick her up. As they stood in the hot parking lot, Ava cried, "Why do they always think I'm wrong? I didn't do anything." She put her hand on Ava's shoulder. "Because they don't see you. They only see what they think they see. So how do I get them to see the real me?" She smiled sadly. "It's not your job to convince them, Ava. But it's your job not to let them decide who you are." Remembering that, Ava opened her eyes again. She sat up straight, taking a deep breath to regain the calm she needed, the calm her grandmother had given her like a silent legacy. "Officer Grant," Ava said slowly, "I want to know the specific reason for forcing me to leave my seat." Grant tried to keep his voice light. "We're just trying to assist the crew." The flight attendant reported that a passenger was in the wrong seat. "I have a ticket." Ava placed her boarding pass in her palm, holding it up just enough for Grant to see. "Valid ticket. Valid seat." Grant reached out to take it, but Melissa jumped in and snatched it away like prey. "I've looked." She shook her head confidently. "She's not the type of passenger suitable for seat 1A. A seemingly harmless remark, but full of poison. Ava swallowed the bitter feeling rising in her throat. Behind the passengers began to stir. A man whispered, "There is no way a black person would sit in seat 1A. I have flown this route for 15 years and have never seen one." "Yeah," a woman replied. "I think she was just trying to get around something." The words hung in the air like paper cuts, cutting into Ava's heart bit by bit. No one said them to her face, but that didn't make the hurt any less. Elena, the Latina passenger in the back row, saw the skin color, saw the wariness of the faces around her, and it felt familiar. She stood up again. "I'm sorry, but I saw her boarding." The ticket said 1A. "She didn't sneak in." "Dalton, que fatli, ma'am, please sit down. This does not concern you." Ava looked at Elena. Their eyes met. There was a little fear in Elena's eyes. But more than that, there was sympathy. Ava nodded. A small nod of thanks. Small but sincere. Dalton turned back to face Ava. "Ma'am, if you refuse to leave your seat, we will be forced to write you up, and you will be banned from flying Skylink for 24 months. In that moment, Ava felt like she was at a crossroads. An instruction to her to get off the plane. Be quiet. Ignore. Let it go. As thousands of other black people have done to protect their own safety. The other way is to confront a system that is inherently unfriendly to people like her. Ava's mind raced for a few seconds. Her heart whispered, "You have to be strong." But another part asks, strong for whom? And what does it bring in return? Then Ava thought of her mother. Thought of her own employees, black, brown, and yellow people who had told Ava similar stories. If she keeps quiet today, who will speak for them tomorrow? Ava's shoulders relaxed. She looked straight at Dalton, her voice low but clear. "You didn't see my ticket. You didn't check my ID. You didn't follow the proper procedure. But you decided I was wrong. Why is that, Mr. Dalton?" The air suddenly became thick. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop. Dalton didn't answer. Because he knew. Even if he wouldn't admit it, Ava's question touched on the very truth he was avoiding. Melissa stood beside him, her face red with shame and anger. Grant was confused again. He looked at Ava as if he were looking at someone he thought he understood, but wasn't so sure anymore. Millen touched Grant lightly as if to say, "Something is wrong. We should check it out." But before anyone could speak, Ava put her hand in her pocket. A small movement, but it seemed to signal a change in direction of the wind. She took nothing out. She just placed her hand on a familiar object in her pocket, something that with just the touch of a finger reminded Ava who she was, where she stood, and why she must not bow to injustice. Her heart rate gradually stabilized. "I will leave my chair," she said. "If you prove me wrong." A gentle challenge. But it was a slap in the face to Dalton's pride. He tightened his grip on his briefcase. "Grant, Millen, escort her out." Elena exclaimed in panic. "No, she didn't do anything." Several other passengers looked at each other, eyes wavering, no longer sure they were on the right side. Grant took a step forward. Mellon took a step forward. Ava looked up. She had no intention of running. No intention of fighting. No intention of screaming. She was just about to stand up, but before she could stand, a voice rang out from the back of the compartment. Loud, clear, and weighty. hold on. What exactly is going on here? All turned back at once. The top supervisor on the flight, Captain Thomas Weston, was approaching. The atmosphere changed instantly. No one knew that moment would be the turning point for this entire flight, and for the lives of those standing in the compartment. Captain Thomas Weston was not the type to show up in the middle of a cabin over a minor dispute. In more than 30 years of flying, he had learned two things very clearly. One, most conflicts on planes can be resolved with a few gentle words. Two, when the flight attendant calls the captain, it means things have gone beyond mild. He entered the cabin with a steady gait, his face calm, but his eyes observing every detail, as if assessing the condition of a $25 million jet engine. As he stopped in front of seat 1A, Ava noticed that his gaze wasn't like Melissa's or Dalton's. It wasn't critical. It wasn't judgmental. It was inquiring. "What's going on here?" Captain Weston asked, his voice low and clear, causing the cabin to fall silent. Dalton cut in front quickly and disrespectfully. "Captain, this passenger refuses to leave the wrong seat. We need to get her off to keep the takeoff schedule." Weston looked at Dalton a beat longer than necessary. He turned to Officer Grant. "Have you verified the tickets?" Melissa immediately replied for him. "I did see it," but Captain Weston raised his hand decisively. "I asked Mr. Grant." Grant was a little startled, but replied honestly, "No, sir. We haven't checked it directly." A soft "oh" came from a few passengers. Elena whispered, "I told you so." Dalton sighed heavily, his irritation evident. "Captain, with all due respect, we can't waste any more time arguing with." Weston raised his hand again, this time sharper. Ava watched this scene with a new calm, not because she believed everything would turn out well, but because for the first time someone was listening. Weston bent down and gently asked Ava, "Mom, can I see your boarding pass and ID?" His voice was not harsh, not contemptuous, not defensive. Ava nodded. It was a small movement, but to her it felt like a heavy stone had been lifted from her chest. She took out the ticket and handed it to Captain Weston with steady hands. Weston took the ticket and looked at it carefully, without looking at it, without making any expression. He tilted his head, checking the barcode, seat number, flight date, and bold name, Ava Sinclair. It looked as simple as any other ticket, but in that moment, it became the first sign of who was wrong in this story. Melissa crossed her arms, waiting for a rebuttal. Dalton stood back, his face tense. Weston asked a very basic question that any of them should have asked at the beginning. "Miss Sinclair, do you have ID?" Ava opened her black leather wallet, pulled out an identification card, and handed it to him. In just 3 seconds, Weston's expression changed. Not shock, not fear, but realization. He looked up at Ava like a man who had just run into a senior colleague he didn't recognize in casual attire. "Ava Sinclair," he repeated, as if to make sure he wasn't mistaken. Ava nodded. "Yes, it's me." A silence stretched across the cabin, as if the air were about to change color. Dalton leaned over. "What? Who is she?" Melissa reluctantly curled her lips. "Just a normal name. I've met many people who fake IDs." Weston turned to look at Melissa. A stern look made her take a half step back. "This ID is not fake." He spoke slowly, clearly. "And I want you to know, she is a Skylink Gold customer." Grant and Millen looked at each other. Dalton stood frozen. Elena covered her mouth. The man in seat 1C, who had been filming from the beginning, paused, his finger pausing from pressing the record button. Ava remained silent, but inside, part of her felt sad. Sad that things only change when they see her status, not when they realize how they treat a human being. Weston placed the ticket and ID in Ava's hand, bowing slightly. "I apologize for the inconvenience, Miss Sinclair." Melissa jumped up immediately. "Captain, you can't believe all that." "Enough," Weston said, not loudly, but forcefully enough to silence any objections. The whole cabin was silent. "We'll handle this properly." Then he turned to Dalton. "Why did you ask security without verifying the ticket?" Dalton stammered. I trust my staff's report." She said. "Did your staff check the tickets?" Weston asked Melissa. Melissa raised her chin. "I checked. And I saw signs." "You don't check," Weston interrupted. "You snatch the ticket out of the passenger's hand. You don't scan it. You don't check the name. You just judge." The truth was revealed, making several passengers nod in agreement. Even the man in seat 1C whispered, "He's right." Melissa's cheeks flushed. She clenched her fists, her lips trembling as if ready to respond, but Weston didn't give her the chance. He turned to Ava. "Ma'am, I'm truly sorry. No passenger deserves to be treated like that." Ava looked at him for a moment, long enough for Weston to understand that sorry wouldn't heal the wound. "Captain," Ava said, her voice low but clear, "it's not about the ticket." Weston listened. "The thing is, I was treated like a sinner before I even said a word. Because they looked at me and thought, I don't belong here." A sigh escaped from somewhere behind her. An older woman looked down at the floor, her fingers twisting around the strap of her bag. She must have been thinking the same thing when Ava walked in. Ava continued, "I don't want to make it difficult for anyone. I just want to be treated like any other passenger." The calmness in his words made Captain Weston feel as if he were standing before someone of a status far superior to the chair he was sitting in, the captain's chair. Dalton still holds on to his last bit of power. "Captain, we still have to make sure we don't miss the flight." I think Weston turned his voice firm. "We were delayed because you were not doing your job, not because of the passengers." Dalton swallowed. Melissa stood behind him, her hands clenched, her face pale. Ava looked at the scene and felt a pang in her heart. She wasn't here to make anyone lose their job, but she couldn't pretend that everything was okay. Weston pulled out his walkie-talkie. "I need a flight manager to come to the cabin immediately," and closed the internal live stream. The statement startled Melissa. She looked at her phone, her hands shaking as she turned off the stream. A few passengers nudged each other, whispering. She was live streaming it. Oh boy! A wave of public opinion began to form right in this small compartment. Ava breathed slowly. She felt a little lighter, but also knew this was only the beginning. Because she suspected the greater truth was yet to be revealed. A deep intuition told her this wouldn't stop at just apologizing. Captain Weston looked at Ava as if he wanted to say something more, but before he could open his mouth, a voice came over the radio. "Captain Weston, this is Chief Hudson. I'm on my way." "What's the matter?" Weston replied. "Come and see for yourself." Ava placed her hand on her pocket where the important object still lay neatly inside. She knew the moment was coming. The moment when the whole truth would be laid on the table. The moment when all preconceptions would be challenged. The decisive moment of the lives of all those standing in this compartment. Chief Hudson entered the cabin, looking slightly annoyed, not because of Ava, but because he could sense that the cabin was a little off. Curious glances, confused faces, phones still secretly recording. It didn't feel like a small argument. It felt like something was brewing. Captain Weston, Hudson said, "What's going on? We're losing our takeoff slot." Weston stepped slightly in front of Ava's chair, a natural reflex for a vigilante. This made Dalton frown. Melissa stepped back, trying to cover her still-lit phone, afraid that Weston would ask to check it. Hudson glanced around the cabin, then stopped at Ava. Something in his eyes changed just a little recognition, a little confusion, a little wariness. Hudson asked, "Ma'am, can I see your ticket and ID?" Before Ava could reply, Weston spoke up. "I looked. Valid ticket. Valid ID. And she did nothing wrong." Hudson paused. Dalton interjected. "Sir, we suspect this passenger is using an invalid ticket, or Mr. Dalton," Weston said, his voice growing impatient. "You haven't checked the ticket. You haven't checked the procedure. You're just relying on your judgment." That sentence was like a needle popping a balloon. Hudson took a deep breath. He turned to Ava, speaking in a softer voice. "I would like to hear from you." At that moment, the cabin fell into a heavy silence. No more whispers. No more unpleasant clicking of tongues. Only the sound of the air conditioner and Ava's heart beating softly in her chest. Ava put her hands on her knees and said slowly, "I just sat down in the seat I had bought. My ticket was snatched away from me. I was told I didn't belong there. And when I didn't agree with that stereotype, they called security." Her voice was not high, but each word fell like a sad note. Hudson looked at Melissa. "What do you say, Miss Vaughn?" Melissa clasped her hands behind her back, trying to keep her composure. "I was just doing my job. I saw. She didn't look like a first-class passenger. I doubted the ID," and Hudson frowned. "What makes you suspicious?" Melissa opened her mouth, but there was no reasonable answer to escape the silent courtroom that was taking place in the compartment. Ava looked at all of that with eyes that were both calm and sad. Sad, because the real reason was known to everyone, but no one said it out loud. Hudson turned back to Weston. We still need to consider the whole situation. But first, he looked at Ava for a week. It wasn't the look of someone looking for fault, but of someone trying to piece together the whole picture. Ma'am, do you have any more information about the booking account? Booking ID, or additional information, so we can verify faster? Ava heard that, and knew this moment has come. The moment she must decide whether to reveal the truth that will change not only this situation, but the future of Skylink Airlines. She breathed slowly. In that moment, Ava remembered her grandmother's words. It's not your job to convince them, but don't let them decide who you are. Maybe it's time to let them know who you are. Ava looked straight at Hudson, her voice still very soft. I have additional information. But before I give it, I want you to know that this is about more than just a ticket. Hudson nodded. I understand, and not just about an apology. Hudson was silent. Ava reached into her coat pocket, the one she always carried with her on business trips. She pulled out a small, well-kept brown leather wallet. A moment of silence passed. Ava opened her purse and took out a black metal card with a laser-etched gold border. The light from the cabin reflected off the card, causing some passengers to squint. Elena covered her mouth with her hand. The man in seat 1C sat up a little to get a better look. Ava placed the card in her palm, turning it around so Hudson and Weston could read it. It says Ava Sinclair, founder and chief executive officer, Sinclair Aeronautics Group. Below is a familiar logo of the airline industry, one whose importance only those in the industry know. Weston's eyes widened. Hudson stood still, like a tree struck by lightning. Dalton dropped the pen. It hit the floor with a dry click, marking the end of his blind confidence. As for Melissa, her face turned from pink to paper white. Because Sinclair Aeronautics Group is no ordinary company. It is one of the top 3 suppliers of engines, avionics, and maintenance contracts to U.S. civil aviation. Hudson swallowed hard. You are Ava Sinclair. That Ava Sinclair. Ava nodded, not arrogantly, not conceitedly. Just a simple statement of fact. Yes. The air in the cabin seemed to have been sucked out. The whole world condensed around those 2 short words. Hudson took a half step back. I don't know. I really don't know. Ava replied softly. I know. And that's why I kept quiet in the first place. That made Weston look at her with deep respect. He understood that people with great power often did not like to flaunt it. But he also understood that at some point power was not meant to intimidate but to right wrongs. Ava continued. This aircraft is powered by the Sinclair Aeronautics S-3 hybrid propulsion system. My company provides maintenance systems for Skylink. I am on my way to a meeting with your company to renew the contract. Hudson looked at Melissa as if she had just crushed an important piece of aviation history. Ava continued, her voice calm, but each word like a knife cutting through the thick air. I've heard many stories about passengers being discriminated against, but I never thought today would be my turn. Ride on an airplane powered by the technology my company produces. The man in seat 1C muttered softly. Oh my God, this is bad. This is really bad. Elena Thumb. She's the woman from that Forbes article last month. Melissa trembled. I don't know. I didn't mean to. Ava didn't look at her. Didn't need to. She just said to Hudson, I want to see how Skylink handles this. Because if someone with power and status, am being treated like this, what about those who have no voice? Hudson stood still, his hands hanging down as if deprived of words. Weston was the first to regain his composure. Miss Sinclair, what you said is absolutely correct. I apologize. On behalf of Skylink, I apologize to you for allowing things to turn out that way. Ava nodded slightly, but her eyes were no longer the eyes of someone offended. They were the eyes of someone about to make a big decision, one that could change the course of events. She took a slow breath, then said, I'll give you the ticket account verification code. And then we'll talk about responsibility. Weston and Hudson both froze. The word responsibility fell from Ava's mouth like a tidal wave crashing against the side of a ship. They knew, from now on, every step had to be extremely careful. Ava opened her phone. The screen lit up, numbers appeared, but just as she was about to give Weston the booking code, a notification suddenly flashed on the screen. Ava looked at it for a few seconds. Then her eyes changed. Not anger, not fear. But it was a confirmation that things had gone far beyond an incident on a plane. Ava looked up, looking straight at Weston and Hudson. Maybe. This is bigger than we think. The cabin fell silent again. And what happens next won't just be about a first-class ticket. Ava looked at her glowing phone screen. A notification had appeared, not a text from a friend or an email from her assistant, but an urgent red-labeled alert. Protocol Ember activated. Your legal and corporate teams are online. Her whole body stopped for a beat. Not from fear, but because she understood what this meant. Protocol Ember is a protocol that is only activated when there is an emergency related to reputation, safety, or legality. It never turns on by itself. It only appears when someone on Ava's team perceives a serious risk. Ava took a slow breath. She knew every action from now on would no longer be a personal reaction. It would be the reaction of a CEO whose rights were being violated on the very product her company created. Captain Weston saw Ava's expression change and asked softly, "Everything all right, Miss Sinclair?" Ava didn't answer right away. She looked around the cabin at every face, every eye. Some were fearful, some curious, some ashamed of their misjudgment. Finally, Ava turned back to Weston. Her voice softened. "Captain, from now on we need to do everything according to the correct procedure." Hudson felt a chill down his spine when he heard that. He nodded. "I agree. Could you please provide additional information?" Ava held the phone with both hands, as if carefully considering each step. Then she gave a 6-digit code. "Here is my booking number. But before you check," she looked straight at Dalton and Melissa. "No hate, just the truth. I want everyone here to understand passengers should not be treated with suspicion just because they don't look like what you think they should look like." No one answered. A few passengers looked down. The man in 1C swallowed, realizing for the first time that he had contributed to this embarrassing moment. Hudson entered the code. In less than 3 seconds, the screen displayed the following message. "Booking verified. Priority executive tier. Han Koch, Ava Sinclair. Seat 1A. Confirmed. Paid full fare." Hudson clenched his fists on the phone. He turned to Weston, his voice anxious. "It's very real. All of it." Weston sighed as if a heavy stone had been lifted from his shoulders. He bowed his head and said, "Miss Sinclair, I apologize a second time. Ava raised her hand slightly. "I don't need any more apologies. I just need to be right from now on." A silence fell over the cabin. Not intense silence, but the silence of men who knew they had just witnessed something bigger than themselves. But then the unexpected happened. The 2 security guards' phones vibrated at the same time. The electronic alarm sounded exactly the same sound. Grant frowned, opening the phone first. His hand shook slightly. Millen opened it. They looked at each other, eyes wide. Dalton saw that and asked, "What is up?" Grant slowly turned to Ava, his gaze no longer that of a security guard looking at a passenger. It held wariness, respect, and concern. "Captain Weston," Grant said, "we just received an urgent message from airport security headquarters." Weston frowned. "What announcement?" Grant took a breath. "Skylink is freezing, pending all maintenance contracts from Sinclair Aeronautics, until this incident is cleared up." The whole cabin exploded with murmurs. "What? You're kidding. Oh God, this is serious." "No way." Dalton turned pale. That is a high-level matter." "Who allowed them?" Grant looked at Ava. "The message says the activation request came from Sinclair's CEO office." Melissa took a step back, hands gripping the chair. Elena thumb. She didn't even raise her voice, and the whole system reacted. Ava said nothing. She just looked down at the black metal plate still in her palm, as if remembering the responsibilities of being the head of a billion-dollar aerospace technology corporation. She didn't order the freeze. But her team, when they saw the live stream being shared internally within Skylink, knew the CEO was being publicly humiliated. And they reacted. Ava breathed slowly. "Captain," she said softly, "I didn't ask them to do that. But I can't stop them. When they believe the CEO is being treated wrongly." Weston breathed heavily, his hand on his forehead. Dalton was as stiff as a stone statue. Melissa was shaking so much that she had to hold onto the chair to keep from falling. While everyone was still stunned, Ava's phone lit up again. A video call from General Counsel, Sinclair Aeronautics Chief Legal Officer, the group's top advisor. Hudson's eyes widened. Even the 1C man felt scared. Ava looked at Weston. I have to take this call. Weston nodded. Ava turned on the speakerphone, but turned the screen face down for privacy. The legal advisor's voice rang out, calm, deep, and the standard of a senior lawyer, Miss Sinclair. We have seen the entire leaked livestream. Our PR, legal, and communications teams are in rapid response mode. We want to confirm the facts before taking any further steps. Ava looked around the cabin, seeing the eyes on her expectant. Would she be angry? Sue the entire airline or call for arrest? She chose another option. I'm fine, Ava said. No one was hurt, but there was clear discrimination. I want every action to be based on facts, not emotions. On the other end of the line, the counselor was silent for a second, as if analyzing the weight of each word Ava said. Very well, Miss Sinclair. We will continue to keep Protocol Ember under surveillance. All legal documents will be sent to you within 10 minutes. Call ended. Ava put down the phone. First class was silent. Elena looked at her with eyes that were both admiring and emotional. The man in seat 1C whispered she could have destroyed the whole airline, but she's still calm. Hudson looked at Ava for a long time. Miss Sinclair, we need to know what you want right now. Ava squeezed her hand. This was her moment of choice, like the opening line of the story. Choose to let go, or choose to make things right. She looked up, her voice low and clear. I want Skylink to demonstrate that it respects all passengers without distinction. Dalton blurted out. We always respect. Ava looked at him. Just one look, but it was enough to make Dalton fall silent. Respect isn't about slogans, Ava says. It's about how employees treat customers when they don't know who they are. That sentence made some people bow their heads in shame. Ava continued. And before this flight takes off, I want to know if Skylink is willing to make it right. The whole cabin turned its eyes to Hudson and Weston. Hudson took a deep breath, then said, You will have your answer. Today. Ava nodded. And in that brief moment of peace, the flight, which was supposed to be an ordinary day, officially became a symbol of dialogue between humans and systems. A moment no one on board will ever forget. And this is just the beginning. A long silence lingered in the cabin. Not a normal silence, but the kind of silence that occurs when a person realizes he is facing a wave larger than he could have imagined. Ava leaned back in seat 1A. She wasn't angry, she wasn't shaking, she wasn't snapping. She just let her breathing slow down, like someone about to enter the most important phase of a billion-dollar deal. Captain Weston stood in front, his hands clasped together. The wrinkles on his forehead deepened the expression of a man who had just realized that this was no longer a simple matter of dealing with a passenger. In the back seat, Elena Morales sat silently, her eyes fixed on Ava with a mixture of admiration and pity. She knew that composure was only found in people who were used to keeping themselves upright in situations where others would immediately crumble. Dalton stood there, disoriented. He had always believed himself to be the one in charge. Now his authority was slipping from his grasp like sand in a strong wind. As for Melissa, she stood back slightly, her hands clenched until they were white. She no longer live-streamed. She no longer had the triumphant look when finding fault with a passenger. Now, there was only the fear that she had done something irreversible. Just then, Captain Weston's phone rang. An internal call. The ringtone wasn't loud, but it was enough to make the cabin hold its breath. Weston looked at the screen. He frowned. That's... The regional general manager Hudson leaned closer. You should listen, Captain. It might be about Protocol Ember. Weston nodded. He pressed the call button, turning on the speaker so that the surrounding team could hear. A stern, middle-aged male voice rang out. Thomas, I just got the full report. Tell me the real situation. Weston looked at Ava hesitantly and replied, We still have the situation under control. But there was an initial mistake from the staff. The voice on the other end of the line was not loud, not shouting, but the sharpness was like steel. How much error? Hudson interjected. Sir, the error is at a level that could affect the company's strategic contract. Several passengers gasped. Melissa flinched as if a cold wind had blown past her. Ava did not intervene. She placed her hands on her thighs, her gaze straight but soft. She understood clearly that at this moment every word she said carried weight. She did not want to use her power to oppress others. She wanted to use the truth to correct mistakes. The regional director heard that and was silent for a few seconds, then said, I received a communique from Sinclair Aeronautics. And this is what prompted me to call. The cabin tilted a beat. The statement said that CEO Ava Sinclair was publicly discriminated against on one of the aircraft for which she helped design the engine system. Elena whispered, "Oh my God." Dalton's face was white. Melissa almost wanted to cry. The man's voice on the phone continued, "And I need direct confirmation from Miss Sinclair before we call an emergency meeting." Weston turned to Ava, bowing slightly, as if asking permission. Ava nodded slightly. Weston brought the phone closer to her. "Miss Sinclair, he wants to hear it from you." Ava took her time. She took a deep breath, summoning the calm that years of leadership had honed. Then she said softly, but clearly, "I don't want this to be blown out of proportion. I don't want anyone to lose their job because of a momentary emotion. But I want Skylink to understand, a passenger doesn't deserve to be degraded just because they don't look like what other people think they look like." The whole cabin fell silent. The man's voice on the other end of the line dropped a beat. "Miss Sinclair, thank you for clarifying." Ava continued, "I believe in Skylink's ability to right the wrongs. I believe in the value of aviation. But I also believe that if things like this are not spoken about, they will continue to happen to those who have no voice." Hudson bowed his head. Elena wiped away tears. The whole cabin seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Ava ends, "I don't want revenge. I want change." The other end of the line was silent, then only said, "We will act immediately." Call ended. Hudson turned to the crew. "We need to meet immediately." Dalton hesitated. I didn't think it would go that far." Hudson looked straight at him. "Read this went as far as we let it go. Today is not about power. Today is about the most basic respect for human beings." Melissa burst into tears. "I didn't mean to. I just thought." Ava looked at her, not angry, not cold. Just the empathy of someone who had endured a lot of judgment in her life. "Miss Vaughn, mistakes can be corrected, but only if we look at them squarely." Melissa slumped in her seat. The passengers around her looked at Ava differently, too, not just with respect, but with gratitude. While the atmosphere was calming down, Ava's phone lit up once more. Not a legal message, not an internal memo. A video call from Chief Engineering Division, Sinclair Aeronautics. Hudson breathed heavily. The engineering department is also involved. Ava smiled slightly, a little sad, a little proud. "These people have worked with me for years. They protect their jobs by protecting my honor." Ava picked up the call. The face of Dr. Noah Carter, director of engineering, appeared, lightly curly hair, stern, but kind eyes. "Ava, we saw the live stream. The tech team is furious." Ava shook her head slightly. "Don't be angry for me, Noah. I'm fine." Noah took a deep breath. "It's not a problem. The problem is that they insulted the CEO of the company that supplies them with an entire engine system. This is no small incident," Ava said softly. "Noah, I want this handled with kindness, not power." Noah looked at her for a long second. "You always do." "Okay, we'll follow your lead. But Skylink has to do it right." Call ended. The first-class cabin fell silent again, but this time it was the silence of those witnessing the true power of composure. Hudson stood up in front of the compartment. "Dear passengers, we are taking internal reports and will make personnel adjustments on the spot. The flight will resume as soon as possible." Weston approached Ava. "Miss Sinclair, thank you for keeping us all calm." Ava looked out the window, the afternoon light casting a soft, warm glow on her face. "Captain, I'm calm, because I wish someone would be calm like that when I was young and being treated badly. But no one did." She turned back, giving a slight smile. "So today, I choose to be that person." Weston looked at her a long time, as if she were one of the strongest people he had ever met. It seemed like the story had died down. But it hadn't. Because just as Weston was about to return to the cockpit, an announcement from Skylink headquarters popped up on all flight crew equipment. Hudson skimmed through, then froze. "No way!" Weston snatched it and read it. Melissa held her breath. Dalton clenched his fists until they turned white. Elena looked at them curiously. Ava remained still, as if she knew it wasn't over. Hudson looked up, his voice trembling. "That is a notice of Skylink launching a system-wide investigation based on this incident." The cabin froze for 3 seconds. Then Hudson continued, "And the person invited to participate as special advisor to this investigation He looked at Ava. His voice almost choked. Is Ava Sinclair? The cabin erupted in murmurs. Elena raised her hand to her mouth. The man in seat 1C blurted out, she's not just the victim. She's about to change the whole airline. Ava squeezed her hand. Not out of pride, but because she knew this was the moment life forced her to stand up, not for herself, but for the people who would board the plane later. She closed her eyes for a second. Not a single tear fell. Just the emotion of someone who had suffered so much injustice, but still chose to build instead of destroy. When the announcement of Ava's appointment as a special advisor was made, the cabin held its breath. No one spoke for the first few seconds. And it was in that moment of silence that Ava could hear her heartbeat clearly, not the beating of fear, but the beating of memory. She closed her eyes for a second, and in the darkness beneath her eyelids, an old image emerged, the image of a young black girl standing at the check-in counter of a small airport in Charlotte, 15 years ago, being told by an employee, "Sweetheart, just economy. First class isn't for you." Ava was speechless. She just stood there, clutching her old laptop bag, her nails digging white into the strap. She had no power, no legal team, no one to video call to defend her. Only shame spread like fire. Ava opened her eyes. The present-day plane cabin returned before her eyes. She was no longer the girl she once was, but the scar had never completely faded. Elena looked at Ava intently, and with some sensitivity, she whispered, "Ava, are you okay?" Ava smiled slightly, as if to cover up a piece of life that had cut into her heart. "I'm fine. It's just, sometimes the past has a way of coming back to remind us why we're here." Elena nodded, her eyes slightly red. In the front row, Captain Weston and Hudson were reading the investigation report over and over again. They both understood this was no longer a one-flight incident. It was a systemic undercurrent. Weston quay saying, "Hudson, this will get the whole company moving." Hudson replied in a low but calm voice, "Maybe it's time." Dalton, on the contrary, felt as if all the blood had drained from his face. He read the notice line by line, his hand trembling slightly. They brought Ava Sinclair into the investigation. "Does that mean Hudson looked at him, not harshly, not reproachfully. "Just a fact, Reed, that means. Today, every misbehavior will be dissected. All of it." Dalton slumped into the empty chair. He had never felt the weight of his words like this before. Meanwhile, Ava received another message. To Office of Federal Aviation Inclusion Standards, OFIS. Elena unconsciously leaned over to look, then covered her mouth. "Oh my God, even the Federal Standards Agency is involved." Ava read the content quickly. OFAIS requested a preliminary report within 2 hours on the incident involving a first-class passenger on Skylink Flight 724 and wanted to hear directly from Ava due to her aviation industry representative nature. Hudson saw the screen light, reflecting on Ava's face, and asked, "Important message?" Ava nodded. "Very important, and quite urgent." Weston interjected, "Miss Sinclair, if you need some time alone, we can arrange for you to go to a private waiting area at the airport when you land. Security will assist." Ava shook her head. "No need. It should all happen here, where it all began." One sentence made the whole cabin silent. But the investigation isn't the only thing coming. Because, at this moment, the aircraft's announcement screen suddenly flashed. An internal message popped up on the control panel in front of the flight crew. "Headquarters monitoring team requests video archive from first class." Melissa was stunned when she saw that. She took half a step back. They want video from the camera system." Hudson looked straight at her. "Melissa, you know that's standard investigative procedure." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I didn't mean to. I think she." Ava stood up. "Take it easy. Don't scare Melissa." She walked up to the young flight attendant, her voice soft but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Melissa, you don't need to make excuses. Everyone saw what happened. But I also saw. You're not a bad person." Melissa mumbled, I judged you." Ava asked just one question, not too heavy. "And now how do you want to fix that?" Melissa burst into tears and collapsed into a chair. "It's not the fall of a man being punished. It's the fall of a man finally seeing himself and the wrong he's done." While Melissa was lost in her emotions, Hudson returned to work. He turned to Weston. We need to take a report. And perhaps remove Mr. Dalton from cabin command duties immediately. Dalton looked up, his voice hoarse. Please, please give me a chance. I can learn from this. Ava looked at Dalton. Not angry, not pity, just the facts I believe anyone can learn. But learning does not mean being in a leadership role. Leadership is a responsibility, not a right. Dalton bowed his head. The words pierced him like a needle through his last defense. Weston put his hand on Dalton's shoulder. Reed, you are not removed from the flight, but from now on you are no longer responsible for operating the cabin. Hudson wrote it down in the minutes. The clicks of the tablet buttons were small, but sharp like a hammer hitting the door of the past. In the tense atmosphere, Ava returned to her chair. She wanted some peace, but as soon as she sat down, her phone lit up. This time, it was from Sinclair Aeronautics PR division. Ava looked at the notification, frowning. A video file is attached. Title Draft. Public response option A. Elena saw Ava hold her breath and asked they prepared a speech for you. Ava nodded. They wanted me to post a 30-second video as soon as I landed to reassure the market. Elena tilted her head. Will you do it? Ava looked at the phone screen, the blue light reflecting off her deep black eyes. I don't know, Ava said. This video will spread 10 times faster. But if I stay silent, people will think I'm like every other CEO, just shutting up and letting the news pass. Elena asked softly, So what does your heart say? Ava closed her eyes for 2 seconds. My heart says, tell the truth. But my head says, the truth can bring down an airline. She put the phone down on the folding table in front of the chair. And I don't want to knock anybody down. I just want justice. But that moment of silence only lasted a few seconds. Because, from the cockpit, Weston stepped out, his face serious. Ava, you should know this. Hudson followed him carrying a tablet. The investigation team requests your presence at the Skylink office immediately upon landing. Within 45 minutes. Elena gasped. So, immediately, Hudson nodded. They said, this investigation could not be delayed. And Miss Sinclair was witness number 1. Ava sat up straight. She didn't look scared, just someone who had just been given a task no one wanted but no one was capable of doing except her. Ava asked, what about the flight? Weston replied, we will prioritize landing on time. But once the plane touches down, everything will go into Amber Alert status. Amber Alert, Elena exclaimed. Isn't that the kind for missing children? Hudson explains, inside the airline industry. An Amber Alert also means an incident involving senior management and reputational risk. Not fun, but necessary. Ava nodded slowly. Then she said, her voice low, but full of power, I understand. And I will be there. Weston bowed slightly, a sincere respect. Elena put her hand on Ava's shoulder. Ava, whatever happens, you're not alone. Ava turned to her with a thin, soft smile. Thank you, Elena. The cabin fell silent again, but this time it wasn't fear, but it is the waiting for a change to come. A change that no one expected. Would start from a slap, a contempt, and a word. Maybe you're sitting in the wrong seat, but Ava knows. There was no wrong seat she sat in. She had worked her whole life to sit in seat 1, today, and to make sure the story never happened again to anyone. She looked out the window. The late afternoon sunlight cast a soft, golden glow. And Ava said to herself, it's time. The captain's voice echoed in the cabin deep, but slightly hoarse as if he had thought for a long time before pressing the button. Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing to descend. Flight SK-724 will be landing in approximately 12 minutes. Please fasten your seatbelts. There was something strange in his voice. A little shaky, a little tired, but also a little respectful that only those who face the truth learn to give. Ava heard the announcement and gently placed her hands on her knees. Her hands were calm, a calm that even she sometimes couldn't understand. Elena glanced at Ava, then smiled softly. Ready for the storm? Ava replied in a small voice, but every word was heard clearly. I've been through many storms, but this one doesn't seem like the others. Elena tilted her head. What's the difference? Ava looked out the window where the ground was slowly emerging. This time, I didn't just walk through the storm. I had to stand in the eye of the storm. Inside the cabin, Melissa hid behind seat number 2, clutching a small towel. She was no longer crying out loud, but her red, swollen eyes told the whole story. She looked at Ava from afar, as if she were looking at a grown-up version of herself, a version Melissa never dreamed she would become. At this moment, she wanted to step forward to apologize, but her feet wouldn't move. Dalton sat a few rows away, his hands clasped together, his back hunched like a man who had lost a part of his life. He no longer had the swagger. He no longer looked at people with half-closed eyes. His eyes were almost the eyes of a father regretting his mistake in front of his child. Passenger 1C occasionally glanced at Ava, sighing as if feeling an unspoken shame. He turned on the recorder, then off, on then off, as if wondering if he had the right to tell this story, or the responsibility to stay silent and learn it. Hudson and Captain Weston stood by the first-class door, communicating more with their eyes than with words. Not because they were at a loss for words, but because they both understood. The moment the plane hits the ground will change their careers, maybe for the better, or maybe for the worse. As the plane shuddered again, Ava closed her eyes for a few seconds, giving herself one last small moment of silence before the ground pulled her back to reality. In Ava's head, it was not the voice of a lawyer, nor the voice of a director of investigation, but it was her mother's voice from years ago. The further you go, the more they test you to see if you will break. But you don't have to struggle. Just stand straight. Ava opened her eyes. They brightened a beat, like she had just remembered why she was strong. As the plane touched down on the runway, there was a thump, small but decisive. Ava felt her body shake with the force of the landing, but her heart remained still. Captain Weston announced again, "We have landed safely at Denver International Airport. Please hold your positions." But then his voice dropped to a low pitch, just loud enough for first class to hear. "The investigation team is waiting outside the door." Elena Quay sang Ava. "Are you ready?" Ava smiled slightly, a smile, not to reassure anyone else, but to keep herself from shaking. "If I'm not ready, they'll still need me." The first-class cabin door swung open, but instead of the usual group of stewardesses greeting passengers, Ava saw a team of 5. Not the police, not security, but the Skylink internal investigations team, dressed in black suits with shiny metal name tags. The leader was Samantha Brooks, chief of investigations, platinum hair, tied back, face as sharp as glass. She took a step forward, her voice polite but hard as steel. "Miss Ava Sinclair." Ava stood up and fixed her coat. "I'm here." Samantha bowed her head. "We were asked to escort you directly to the Skylink office. The meeting begins as soon as you arrive." Elena held Ava's hand gently. "Can I go with you?" Ava looked at her gratefully, but shook her head. "No. You've done enough. And this is none of your business." Elena pursed her lips, eyes red. "But I hate to see you go in there alone." Ava placed her hand lightly on the back of Elena's hand. "I've never really been alone." That sentence brought a tear to Elena's eye. Meanwhile, Samantha turned to Hudson. "All personnel present in this compartment, we will need a preliminary interview within 30 minutes. Hudson did not object. He just sighed. "I get it." Melissa stood up. I'll say it first. I want to tell the truth. Everything." Samantha did not appear surprised. "We will accept it in full." Dalton stood up slowly. I take responsibility for my part." That confession made the whole cabin look at him with less cold eyes than before. Ava glanced at Dalton, not to blame, but to confirm that his choice was the right one. Samantha turned back to Ava. "Miss Sinclair, we have a private car waiting downstairs. The media team has cordoned off the area to ensure no image leaks before you leave." Ava shouldered her bag. "Good. I don't want to make things bigger than they need to be." Samantha raised her eyebrows slightly. "Honestly, it's already big enough." Ava smiled thinly. "Well then, I'll try to make it less bad." Before walking out the door, Ava paused. She took one last look around the compartment, looking at Elena, who stood by her when she didn't know who she was, looking at Hudson, who faced the truth, looking at Dalton, who was learning the hardest lesson of his life, looking at Melissa, who was still crying but had faced her mistakes. Ava said, her voice soft but resonant, "Thank you, everyone. Regardless, today was not in vain." Then she walked out, followed by 5 members of the investigation team. At the plane door, Ava was surprised by a sight that made her stop for a moment. Not the press, not a curious crowd, but a dozen Skylink employees lined up on either side. All bowed as Ava passed. Hudson whispered from behind. They don't bow because she's the CEO. They bow because they're ashamed of the company. Ava swallowed. She doesn't want anyone to bow down to her. But sometimes, that bowing down is the starting point of real change. At the end of the line, Samantha opened the door leading to the private parking area. Miss Sinclair, please. Ava stepped into the cool Denver afternoon light. The wind blew lightly against her face, and somehow the wind made Ava feel light. Light in the way, when a difficult journey is about to begin, but this time she doesn't run away. She got into the car. Samantha closed the door. The car engine starts. Ava looked at the road ahead and whispered to herself, today, I am not just defending honor. I am defending those who never had a chance to speak. The car rolled. The storm has officially begun. Ava's car pulled off the runway and into the Skylink administrative complex. Through the darkened windows, she saw cold gray buildings, each pane reflecting the late afternoon sun. The space, though perfectly soundproofed, still had an air of waiting for a storm. Samantha sat across from Ava in the car, her hands clasped together. A strong, disciplined, emotionless woman, but Ava understood that in just a few hours, the amount of pressure Samantha would have to handle would be greater than what many people carry in a year. Ava asked softly, how many people are in the meeting? Samantha replied briefly, 8 people, including the legal director, the human resources director, the head of investigation, 3 senior media representatives, and the regional general manager. Ava nodded, and the Skylink CEO Samantha was silent for a few seconds. You will be participating remotely. This has gone beyond the region. Ava tilted her head, her deep black eyes flashing with a thin sadness. I get it. The car stopped. The door opened. Ava got down. The long hallway was covered in ash-gray tiles, and each step echoed softly but sharply. The staff stood aside as Ava passed. No one spoke, but their eyes were filled with meaning, fear, respect, and awakening. Ava tried to keep her breathing steady, not because she was afraid of the meeting, but because it felt all too familiar walking into rooms of power where people looked at her like she was a variable no one could touch without getting hurt. Samantha led Ava to room 407. The glass door was frosted. A sign in the margin read Confidential, Internal Review Panel. Samantha said, when you come in, everything will be recorded. You have the right to remain silent, but your words are important. Ava looked at her. I won't keep quiet. I want everything clear. Samantha nodded and pushed the door open. The room was spacious, the table large and oval. The white light was bright enough, not harsh, not soft, the kind of light meant to see facts, not emotions. 8 people were already seated. Each had a file in front of them and a small screen displaying data. The legal director, Mr. Martin Hale, silver-haired slim, looked at Ava first. Miss Sinclair, thank you for coming. Ava walked in and sat in the middle seat. She didn't shake. She didn't bow. But she wasn't arrogant either. She was just proper. Hale continued, we want to start by reviewing the controversial live stream. A staff member pressed the button. Melissa's live voice rang out, her voice full of sarcasm. First class is not for someone like you. Ava closed her eyes for a second. The click of a camera. The snickers from a few passengers. Dalton's voice. I don't think you can afford this ticket. Then Ava's voice, soft but firm, I have a ticket, and I want to be treated normally. Clip stops. The room was silent. The Human Resources Director, Miss Rebecca Lawrence, said in a low voice, Miss Sinclair, I want to hear your true feelings, not as a CEO, but as a passenger. Ava took a small breath. She said, I felt treated like I didn't belong in a seat I had paid for. And not just for money, but for my entire life's work. Rebecca bowed her head and took notes. Ava continued, that feeling is familiar, not new. It's just that this time, everyone can see it more clearly thanks to the camera. Another wave of silence fell over the room. Regional General Manager Daniel Pierce leaned forward. Miss Sinclair, we want to be transparent. Some of our staff reported that you were disruptive when asked to move to another chair for testing. Ava's expression remained unchanged. I have the right to have my seat confirmed. And even if I'm not the CEO, I have the right not to be treated like a criminal. Hale interjected, his voice low but sharp. She sat quietly in her chair. No yelling, no fighting, no danger. It was all recorded. I didn't see any troublesome behavior. Daniel was confused. A communications assistant spoke up. But Miss Sinclair, viewers online are divided. Some say she is deliberately fighting for attention. Ava turned to look at him. Her eyes weren't angry. They weren't harsh. Just the eyes of someone who has heard thousands of prejudices all his life. Do you think someone who spent years building a career would want to ruin it with a chaotic live stream? He stiffened. Ava continued. If I wanted to go viral, I wouldn't choose to be humiliated in front of hundreds of people. The whole room fell into a deeper silence. Rebecca, HR director, put down her pen and asked Miss Sinclair, we saw in the flight records that you activated a protocol called Protocol Ember. We want to know if you used your CEO power to exert pressure. Ava paused for a beat. The whole room looked at her. That question is not easy to answer. Ava looked straight at Rebecca. I didn't activate Ember. My legal team activated it when they saw the live stream going viral internally on Skylink. Daniel frowned. But you could have asked them to turn it off. You didn't. Ava nodded. Yes. Because if I asked them to turn it off, it means I want to hide something. A communications director asked, so you let it spread further. Ava said softly but firmly, I let the truth spread. Hale, the legal director, smiled knowingly. That sentence both protects Ava and opens up a new line of investigation. Sometimes the truth needs to be seen to be corrected. Daniel asked, his voice tense, but Miss Sinclair, do you understand the financial pressure? Skylink is under. The stock is down 4% in 2 hours. Social media is attacking the company. We are in a race against time to retain customer trust. Ava looked at him. Not soft but not cold. I understand, but I didn't cause it. Discrimination caused it. Lack of due process caused it. Arrogance caused it. Daniel stiffened. Ava continued. And I didn't come here to kill Skylink. I came here to help Skylink survive. The hot coffee in the cup before a director shook slightly, as if reacting to the air in the room. Samantha took the thick file we checked, the HR data of Melissa Vaughn and Reed Dalton, and found multiple reports of violations in the past. Daniel jumped up. What? Why didn't we know? Samantha said, her voice more sad than angry. Because these reports were marked non-priority or handled with a verbal warning. Which means they were ignored. The conference room was silent. Ava clenched her fists. She felt angry. Not at herself, but at the system for letting the same mistakes happen over and over again. Ava looked at Samantha. Thank you. That's why I wanted to talk today. Not to get anyone fired, but to get Skylink to admit the truth. Samantha nodded, her eyes softening for the first time. Hale asked the last question, dud Ava. What do you want the final outcome of the investigation to be? The whole room turned to her. Ava took a deep breath, looking down at her hands. Back in the day, when I was 19, I cried in the airport toilet because I got kicked out of first class. No one defended me. No one asked if I was okay. The whole room was motionless. Ava continued, her voice warm. I don't want other young girls to cry like that anymore. That's all. Hale closed the file. If that's the goal, I think we can achieve it. Samantha stood up. Miss Sinclair, this meeting is adjourned for now. We will need you again this evening. But for now, you can rest a bit. Ava slowly stood up. As she walked to the door, Daniel called softly, Miss Sinclair. Ava turned back. Daniel said, this time not from a leader, but from a man who understood he needed to relearn how to behave. Thank you for not abandoning Skylink. Ava just replied, I'm not abandoning you. I'm just asking Skylink to grow up. Then she walked out into the hallway. The shoes clicked against the tile floor, not fast, not slow, just steady. The storm had just begun to pass, when a bigger storm was brewing behind the door. Ava stepped out into the fourth-floor hallway, where the pale yellow light cast long shadows on the tile. She felt lighter, but not more comfortable. One meeting was over, but another bigger, heavier awaited. Samantha walked beside him, holding a thick file in her hand. They were silent for a few seconds, only the sound of their shoes clicking on the floor. Then Samantha said very softly, Ava, you did well. Ava smiled slightly. I didn't do anything special. I just told the truth. Samantha shook her head. There are truths. Not everyone has the courage to speak. Ava didn't reply. The words made her nose sting a little, but she kept walking. Ava was led to a specially prepared lounge, a gray sofa, a low wooden table, a pitcher of water, and a wide window overlooking the runway. But just as Ava sat down, the door opened. A man walked in. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wasn't wearing a Skylink name tag. He wore a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled up to the elbows, gray hair, a serious but gentle face, the kind of gentleness of someone who had made many difficult decisions. Samantha stood up, CEO Carter. Ava also stood up reflexively, Henry Carter, global CEO of Skylink Airlines. The man who had not appeared in any regional investigation in the past 3 years. The man the staff used to call the quiet storm. And today, he appeared for her. Carter entered, gently closing the door. Ava Sinclair, he said, his voice low and slightly hoarse. We meet at last. Ava nodded. I didn't think we'd meet again in this situation. He smiled lightly, neither happy nor sad. We owe you an apology, but I didn't come here just to apologize. He pulled up a chair across from Ava. No one said anything for several seconds. The air was tense, as if the room were waiting for the first thunderclap. Finally, Carter placed a thin document on the table. Ava, do you know Skylink is on the brink? Ava kept her eyes steady. I guessed that from the regional general manager's tone. Carter nodded. We have been investigated 3 times in the past 2 years for allegations of discrimination. And the incident involving you could be the last straw. Ava squeezed her fingers lightly. I apologize for putting pressure on the company. Carter raised his hand to stop him. No, it's not your fault. It's our system's fault. But Ava, I'm here for another reason. He pushed the documents towards her. Ava opens, and the very first line made her heart skip a beat. Asterisk asterisk Skylink Airlines. Board proposal, special advisory position, chief. Equity and passenger dignity officer candidate Ava Sinclair. Asterisk asterisk. Ava looked up, the light reflected in her deep black eyes. I don't understand. Carter clasped his hands on the table. Today's incident shows us Skylink's problem is not just a few individuals making mistakes. It's a cultural problem. It's a systemic problem. It's a leadership problem. Ava looked down at the proposal, a senior position on par with COO and CFO, reporting directly to the global CEO. Carter continued, we need someone strong enough to change the entire way Skylink treats passengers. And that person is you. Ava was silent, not from shock, but from pain. This is not an opportunity. This is a burden. Elena once said, you are not alone. But now Ava finds herself at a very lonely crossroads. Ava sat down, her hands clasped together. Carter saw the struggle in her eyes. And he asked, what makes you hesitate? Ava looked out the window where a plane was being pulled into the gate. It looked like a tired bird after a long flight. Mr. Carter, I've spent my life trying to get into aviation, but I've also been pushed out of it many times. Carter did not interrupt. Ava continued, today, I just want to fly normally, to be treated normally, like a human being. Her voice lowered. If I take this position, I will be the center of attention again. And the center of attention is always a target for attack. Carter nodded slightly, like someone who understood the wound she was talking about. Ava, change always comes at a price, but you don't have to do it alone. Ava looked at him. I'm not afraid of working. I'm just afraid of becoming an icon. That was the truest thing she had said all day. Carter leaned back in his chair, his eyes changing tone, more serious, sharper. Ava, do you know why we chose you? Ava shook her head. He said slowly, because you were the only one today with the power to completely destroy Skylink. But you didn't. Ava looked up. She stood in front of dozens of people, in front of a live stream, in front of her own legal team. And she didn't scream, she didn't retaliate, she didn't abuse her power. He paused for a beat. A man in power who does not abuse it, that is the man we need. The room was so quiet that you could hear the wind outside the window. Ava felt her chest slow, not lighten, but quiet. Carter continued, Skylink doesn't need a savior. Skylink needs a leader. Ava looked down at the table. Part of her wanted to nod right away. Another part remembered the contemptuous look Melissa had given her at the beginning of the flight. The time she had been asked, are you sure you're sitting in the right seat? The time she had been asked to undergo an extra check for security reasons. And Ava asked a question that was not in anyone's script. If I took this position, are you sure the staff would listen to me? Listen to a black woman. Listen to someone who many people would say doesn't deserve to sit in that chair. Carter did not answer immediately. He stood up, walked to the glass door, and looked out onto the long runway. No, Ava, not everyone will listen to you. He turned back, his eyes very sincere. But those who need to hear will hear. And that was all she could hope for. Carter turned back to the table, placing his hand on the document. I'm not asking you to make a decision right away. But Skylink needs an answer within 48 hours. And I want you to know this. He looked straight at Ava. If you accept, I will give you full authority to overhaul the company's culture. No limits. Ava paused, including firing senior leadership if necessary. Carter nodded, including me. Samantha, standing by the door, rolled her eyes. Ava didn't breathe for several seconds. It's no longer an invitation. It's a card placed in the middle of the table. One card that could change the airline industry forever. Ava closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, her eyes were no longer shaking. Just silence. And deep. I'll think about it, Ava said. Carter nodded, not disappointed, not hurried. That's all I could ask for. He collected the documents and stood up. Whatever you choose, the truth is today you made Skylink see itself. And that is the first step to change. Ava stood up and followed. Carter held out his hand. Ava took it. That handshake was more than just polite. It was like two people had just signed a treaty not on paper, but on trust. Carter left the room. The door closed. Ava sat down and let out a slow sigh. She looked out the window where the sky was darkening the runway, lights coming on in long streaks. And she whispered, if I accept, I will never be able to live in peace again. But another voice inside her replied, but if I don't accept, people like me will continue to be treated like today. Ava closed her eyes, and prepared for a choice that could change her life. Ava left the conference room and walked into the quiet hallway, leading to the VIP lounge. The atmosphere outside had changed. Gone were the hurried footsteps, the frantic text messages, and the tense eyes of Skylink's leaders. There was only a fragile silence like the calm surface of water after a storm. But Ava knew the real storm was just beginning. She sat down on the window seat and breathed a sigh of relief. A second later, her phone vibrated loudly in her pocket. Not one notification, but a series of them. Text messages, emails, missed calls, and most importantly, the text was flashing, trending nationwide number justice for Ava Sinclair. Ava closed her eyes. She knew this would happen, but not so soon. Ava opened social media. At the top of the page was a video from a passenger. She saw herself the moment Ava was stopped by Melissa, the moment she kept her composure, the moment the camera shook as the passenger exclaimed, "Is she being treated like that just because she's black?" Comments kept rolling in. I had the exact same experience. Thanks, Ava, for standing up. The airline industry needs a real shake-up. First time seeing someone so calm in the face of injustice. And there are also cruel words. She must be acting to be famous. Don't make everything a race issue. Ava sighed. The internet is like that. No one has the complete story, but everyone has a complete opinion. The phone rang again. It was Elena calling from a private number. Ava picked up. Are you okay? Elena's voice was soft, but filled with worry. Ava looked out the window where the Boeing was taxiing onto the runway. I don't know. Elena was silent for a few seconds, and then asked Ava, have you seen the news? The whole country is talking about you. I know. Elijah called me too, he said. If he has to answer the press, he will stand by you. Ava chuckled. Elijah is always like that. He gets up too quickly, sometimes so quickly that it becomes dangerous. Elena spoke slowly and carefully. But Ava, do you understand what this means? If you take that position, you will become the face of the anti-discrimination movement in the industry. Ava squeezed her hand. That's what scared her. As Ava was about to hang up, the lounge door opened. A tall man in his 40s wearing a charcoal suit and deep, tired eyes walked in. Ava recognized him immediately. Thomas Reed, CEO of Meridian Equity, where Ava once worked on an investment project. Someone Ava once respected, and also fiercely argued. Thomas stopped a few steps in front of her. Ava Sinclair, he said, I figured I'd have to meet you sooner or later. Ava stood up. Thomas, what are you doing here? I flew to New York. But when I heard you were here, I have something to say. Elena on the phone heard a strange voice and asked, Who is that? Ava replied quickly, I'll call you back. She hung up. Thomas sat down across from Ava. His face was not angry, not forced, just had an indescribable sadness. Ava, do you know this has become a national concern? I know. Many companies are looking at Skylink as a lesson, but at the same time, they are starting to fear her. Ava frowned slightly. Afraid of me, yes. You became an icon for a few hours. That was good, but also dangerous. Ava looked down at her hands in her lap. She knew Thomas wasn't bluffing. He was telling the truth. You'll have to choose, Ava. Either step into that position of power, or give it up and keep the peaceful life you've always wanted. Ava looked straight at Thomas. What do you think I should choose, I think? He paused, breathing softly. I think you should choose what makes you sleep at night. Ava chuckled. Best advice I heard today. Thomas stood up. Ava, if you take that position, any change you make will make you a target. Sometimes a real target. Ava looked at him, unblinking. Are you warning me? I'm serious. He adjusted his cuffs. You have the power to change the airline industry, but you also have the power to choose peace. Don't let anyone force you to be an icon if you don't want to be. Ava did not reply. Thomas looked at her for a few more seconds and then said, I hope you make the right choice. Not for Skylink, but for yourself. He left the room. Ava sat down, her heart feeling like a stretched string. Another message pops up. Call to Elijah Robinson. Ava hesitated. Her mind was tired. But Elijah had always understood her best, sometimes better than she understood herself. She pressed listen. Ava, are you safe? Elijah's voice was deep and warm, like a piano echoing in an empty room. I'm fine. I'm watching live TV. The whole country is talking about you. Did you know? I know, but you don't need to worry too much. Elijah was silent for a moment. Ava heard him breathing, the soft click of a door closing. He must have just left the conference room. Ava, are you feeling lonely? That question hit right where Ava was trying to avoid. She could not answer. Elijah continued. I know you're strong, but being strong doesn't mean you have to fight alone. Ava looked out the window. It had started to rain. Small, steady light drops like someone was tapping on her soul. Elijah, if it were you, would you take that position? Elijah chuckled. If it were me, no. I don't have the patience and kindness that you have. You're different from me, Ava. You make people want to be better. Ava felt her heart skip a beat. You make it difficult for me. I'm just telling the truth. She asked Elijah, do you think you can change that system? No, Elijah said immediately. I can't. Ava was slightly stunned. But Elijah continued. But you can change the people inside it. And when the people change, the system changes. Ava felt her eyes sting. I'm afraid. I'm not enough. Elijah chuckled. Ava, you are always enough. The only question is, do you want it or not? Ava was silent. A deep silence. I'll have to think, she said. I'm always here, Elijah replied. Whatever you choose. Call ended. Ava put the phone down on the table. A tear fell, so light, so quick. She stood up and walked to the glass door. The rain was still falling steadily, the light reflecting off it in long, soft streaks on the glass. And Ava let herself take a deep breath. She thought of all the people who had been treated like this today. The father whose luggage had been searched multiple times just to be sure. The mother whose hospital staff had looked at her as if she had no insurance. And she herself, Ava Sinclair, who had been told, You're too ambitious for a black girl. Ava placed her hand on the cold glass. If she stepped into the position Carter offered, she would trade her peace of mind. But if she refuses, who will stand up for her? Ava whispered. Am I willing to lose my peace so that others can have more peace? That question still has no answer. But inside her chest, something began to move. Not fear, but it is a call. A call that people like her, people who have tasted so much injustice, always carry in their hearts. Ava looked out at the lit runway, and she knew the end of this journey is coming. Ava left the airport as the sky turned a deep blue. The streetlights lining the walkways lit up, casting long yellow streaks across the rain-soaked ground. It felt like she was leaving an old chapter, but not yet entering a new one. She hailed a ride-hailing car, sat in the back seat, and looked through the steamy windows. The lights passed by like dots of light in a story that had no ending. The phone in her pocket kept vibrating. Text messages, calls, emails, all asking the same question. Ava Sinclair, will you accept? Ava took a deep breath. She needed a quiet place to answer that question, a question bigger than the Skylink invitation. As the car stopped in front of her apartment, Ava felt a cool breeze brush her cheek. She stood on the porch for a long moment before opening the door, and as soon as the door opened, she saw a familiar figure, Elijah. He stood in the living room, hands in pockets, face full of worry, but eyes as gentle as a hug. I knew you would come home, Elijah said. Ava put her bag down and took off her coat. When did you come? About an hour. I figured. You wouldn't want to be alone. Ava sat down on the sofa. Elijah sat quietly beside her, not touching her, not asking any questions. He just sat there, making her feel like she wasn't alone. Several minutes passed in silence. Then Ava said, Elijah, if you accept your life, will never be the same again. I know. You may be the center of criticism, of pressure, of more responsibility than you've ever faced. I know. Ava turned to look at him. Compared to the current me, do you think I can become that kind of person? Elijah smiled a sad but warm smile. Ava, you've always been like this. It's just that now, the world sees it. That made Ava turn away, not because she was embarrassed, but because her heart felt suddenly lighter, as if someone had just removed a stone from her chest. Elijah left around midnight. Ava showered, changed, and walked to the small desk by the window. The night sky seemed to swallow the city. She opened the document Henry Carter gave her. The cover clearly shows the words Chief Equity and Passenger Dignity Officer. Executive Role Proposal. Ava turned the pages. Each line seemed heavier than the previous page. Authority, responsibility, scope of reform, influence on the entire system, all attributed to one person. Then, she opened a small wooden box in her desk drawer. Inside was an old photo Ava, at age 12, with her father on a tour of the Atlanta airport. The little girl in the photo is holding a model airplane and smiling brightly. Her father stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his face proud. Ava stroked the edge of the photo. Her father's hand still felt like it was there, warm, strong, supportive. She remembered something he once said, Ava. When you get on a plane, you don't just fly. You carry the hope of people who haven't been treated as fairly as you. Ava closed her eyes. A tear fell, not because of pain, because she knew the decision had been made. The next morning, Ava wore a light caramel suit, her hair pulled back in a bun. Nothing flashy, nothing loud, just like herself, calm on the outside, strong on the inside. Samantha picked her up at the Skylink headquarters lobby. Carter is waiting in the conference room, Samantha said. Ava nodded slightly. The long hallway was familiar, but it didn't feel as heavy as the day before. Something in Ava's heart took shape like a flat surface of water after accepting the wind. The conference room door opened. Henry Carter and Daniel Pierce were standing waiting. Martin Hale and Rebecca Lorne were sitting behind. No one said anything when Ava walked in. The room waited. Carter said softly, Dr. Sinclair, have you thought about our proposal? Ava stood straight. No shaking, no hesitation. Yes. I've been thinking. Ava looked around the room, the people who had been watching her, judging her, and waiting for her. Then, she said, I will accept. The air in the room nearly cracked with tension before it finally relaxed completely. Daniel breathed a sigh of relief. Rebecca bowed slightly in thanks. Samantha gave a small smile. Carter took a step forward. Ava Sinclair, you just changed the future of Skylink. Ava replied, No, Mr. Carter. I'm not changing Skylink. I'm just helping Skylink see itself. Carter nodded. So, where do we start? Ava opened the second file, the one she'd been writing on all night. We start with the truth. Then she read each line of her proposal times. Mandatory retraining of all frontline staff. Asterisk. Building an anonymous passenger reporting system. Asterisk. Reforming the biased personnel appraisal process. Asterisk. Establish an advisory board of passengers from multiple communities. Asterisk. Disclosure of quarterly discrimination index transparency. Asterisk, and consider replacing leaders who deliberately ignore change. When Ava finished, the conference room was as silent as if a thin layer of snow had just fallen. Martin Hale was the first to break the silence. Dr. Sinclair, this plan is not only powerful, it could become a national model. Ava said softly. If we do. On her way out of Skylink, Ava saw a person standing near the east exit, a young female employee, a familiar face. It was Olivia, the flight attendant who witnessed the whole incident that day. The girl walked up. Dr. Sinclair, could I have a minute? Ava nodded. Olivia took a deep breath. I saw everything that day, and I said nothing. Didn't stand up. Didn't protect you. Olivia's voice trembled slightly. I'm sorry. Not just for being silent, but for knowing that so many people like me were also silent. Ava touched the girl's hand lightly. Thank you for speaking up today. That's how change begins. Olivia wiped her tears and smiled softly. I want to be a better flight attendant. And a better person. You already started, Ava replied. In the afternoon, Ava returned to the airport, not to fly, but to see the runways where her dream began. Elijah called. Ava, have you decided yet? She smiled lightly, her face free as the wind. I decided. Elijah laughed. And Ava looked up at the sky where the plane had just lifted off the ground. I will fight, not because I need power, but because there are so many people who need someone to stand up for them. Elijah was silent for a few seconds, and then said, Ava, I'm proud of you. Ava closed her eyes and whispered, I'm also proud that I finally stopped running away from what was right. A plane took off. The sound of the engine echoed throughout the sky. Ava smiled. She didn't know how difficult the road ahead would be. She didn't know if she had the strength to go all the way, but she knew one thing. Today, Ava Sinclair took off not on a plane, but in life. If you are listening to this story, maybe somewhere in your life you have been underestimated. You have been misjudged. You have wanted to stand up, but you were afraid you were not strong enough. Remember Ava's words. You don't need to change the world. Just change what's in front of you. If everyone does one small thing, the whole system will change. Thank you for reading this. If you found anything that resonated with you, please leave a comment, a share, because who knows, it might uplift someone out there. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so we can meet again in the next stories of hope, strength, and truth.